It's the kind of fight that every MMA fan remembers, not just for the two men in the cage, but for the explosive collision of two very different worlds. Brock Lesnar, the powerhouse who had already taken the WWA by storm and was looking to conquer the UFC, and Cain Velasquez, the quiet, relentless Mexican-American fighter with a work ethic that seemed unbreakable. When these two giants of combat sports finally met in the octagon, it was more than just a fight. It was a battle for supremacy in a sport where reputation and legacy are forged in blood, sweat, and broken bones. The atmosphere leading up to their encounter was nothing short of electric. Brock Lesnar, coming off his controversial rise to UFC stardom, was the talk of the town. His wrestling background, combined with his size and strength, made him an intimidating figure, and he'd already shocked the world by claiming the UFC heavyweight championship just a few years earlier. Lesnar had the aura of someone who could dominate, and his past success in professional wrestling only added to the mystique. But despite all of that, there was a storm on the horizon, and that storm was Cain Velasquez. Velasquez wasn't the loud, brash character that Lesnar was. Instead, he was known for his impeccable conditioning and relentless pace. His work ethic was a story of its own, with countless hours spent in the gym perfecting his technique, his cardio, and his fight IQ. The thing about Velasquez that no one could ignore was his ability to take an insane amount of punishment and keep coming forward. His power wasn't just in his fists, but in his heart and determination. Velasquez was the kind of fighter who believed that no matter how much pain he took, he would outlast anyone who stood in front of him. On paper, this matchup seemed to be a classic contrast of styles. Lesnar, the massive, explosive striker with the wrestling pedigree, against Velasquez, the relentless pressure fighter with an iron chin. Fans, analysts, and even other fighters were divided. Some believed Lesnar would bully Velasquez into submission, using his size and strength to overwhelm the Mexican powerhouse. Others, however, had a different vision. They believed Velasquez's relentless pace would break Lesnar's will, pushing him into a deep, dark place where the former WWA champion would finally crack under pressure. But the tension wasn't just in the build-up to the fight, it was in the atmosphere surrounding it. The anticipation was sky high. For Lesnar, this wasn't just another title defense. This was a moment to prove that he truly belonged in the UFC, that his meteoric rise from wrestling superstar to UFC champion wasn't just a fluke. For Velasquez, this fight represented everything he had worked for, a chance to show the world that his style, his preparation, and his heart could conquer even the most intimidating forces in combat sports. As the fight night arrived, the stakes couldn't have been higher. Fans packed the arena, and the world tuned in, waiting for two of the fiercest competitors to collide. The lights were bright, the air was thick with excitement, and the atmosphere felt electric. For Lesnar, the spotlight was familiar, but it wasn't easy. The weight of being the face of UFC's heavyweights was heavy on his shoulders, and the pressure to maintain that title made his every move scrutinized. On the other hand, Velasquez had something to prove, something that went beyond the bright lights and the glory. He had fought his way to this moment, and now he was ready to show the world that his work ethic and determination were all that mattered. When the cage door closed behind them, it was clear that this wasn't going to be a fight for the faint of heart. The two fighters stood face to face, and the tension in the air could almost be felt by the fans watching from the edges of their seats. The first exchange came quickly, as Lesnar's explosive power clashed against Velasquez's sharp, precise movement. Lesnar came out swinging, using his raw strength to control the distance, looking to land that devastating strike that would end the fight. Velasquez, calm and composed, absorbed the punches with a calm resilience, staying on the move, circling around his much larger opponent. As the round progressed, it was clear that this fight wasn't going to go as many had predicted. Lesnar's power was undeniable, but Velasquez's conditioning and relentless pace were starting to take effect. Every time Lesnar seemed to push the fight in his favor, Velasquez would reset, staying composed and moving forward. The crowd could feel the change, and it was like the tide was slowly turning in favor of the underdog. Lesnar, despite his strength, was beginning to show signs of frustration. The unstoppable force wasn't as unstoppable as he appeared. But then, just when it seemed like the fight was beginning to shift, something unexpected happened. A moment in the second round changed everything. With one brutal takedown and a flurry of strikes, Velasquez took control of the fight, and it was a moment that would change the trajectory of both men's careers. The power that Lesnar had once relied on seemed to vanish, and Velasquez's relentless pressure was taking over. The question was no longer whether Velasquez could win, it was how long Lesnar could withstand the storm that was coming. As the rounds went on, the momentum continued to build in Velasquez's favor, and Lesnar began to show signs of fading. The world watched in disbelief as the larger, stronger fighter was slowly being worn down by a smaller but far more relentless man. The heart and determination of Velasquez were becoming more evident with every strike, and the fight was slipping away from Lesnar. But just as it seemed Velasquez was about to claim his title, Lesnar's explosive power could still change everything in an instant. With the cage door closed and the fight reaching its climax, the real question was, who would break first? Would Velasquez's relentless assault be enough to finish off the once dominant champion? Or would Brock Lesnar find a way to dig deep and prove that he could still reign supreme? The tension in the air was unbearable, and the crowd was on the edge of their seats, waiting for the answer that would come next. Would this be the end of Lesnar's reign, or would he find a way to turn the tables and defend his title? One thing was for sure, this fight was far from over. The arena hummed with anticipation, the crowd buzzing with excitement. The fight had already taken on a life of its own, but there was more to this story than just the clash of two titans in the octagon. Behind the noise of the crowd and the raw energy of the moment, both Brock Lesnar and Cain Velasquez had their own personal journeys, each one more complex than it appeared on the surface. Brock Lesnar's rise to UFC glory was nothing short of extraordinary. After dominating the world of professional wrestling, Lesnar transitioned to mixed martial arts with the kind of audacity that only a few could even dream of. His size, athleticism, and raw strength made him a formidable opponent, but there were those who questioned whether he had the heart to succeed in MMA. Many believed his meteoric rise was merely the product of his wrestling pedigree and sheer physical dominance. But the thing about Lesnar was that he never backed down. His 2008 UFC debut had left many in awe, and his title win over Randy Couture proved that he could handle himself in the cage. But there was always the lingering question, could he maintain it against fighters who specialized in MMA, not just wrestling? By the time Lesnar faced Cain Velasquez, the pressure on him had become insurmountable. His UFC title reign had been marked by victories, but his dominance was never fully accepted by the purists of the sport. They felt that Lesnar, despite his impressive feats, hadn't truly earned his place at the top. And then came Velasquez, a fighter who seemed to represent everything Lesnar was not: humble, hard-working, and relentless. Velasquez's story wasn't one of overnight success or flashy entrances. It was a story of perseverance, grit, and a commitment to perfecting every aspect of his craft. Velasquez had grown up in a world where the fight for respect was just as important as the fight in the cage. Raised in California's wrestling community, he had the kind of work ethic that made him an athlete for the ages. But Velasquez wasn't always the figure fans saw on fight night. Behind the scenes, he carried a quiet determination, often overshadowed by the flashier personalities in the sport. He didn't chase after fame or fame's trappings. His focus was laser sharp on improving every day, on perfecting his cardio and technique. His rise was slower, but it was steady. When he won the UFC heavyweight championship, it wasn't with the forceful, explosive display that Lesnar brought to the cage, but with the steady, calculating intensity of someone who had worked tirelessly to earn every step of his success. As the days leading up to the fight wore on, the contrast between these two men became more pronounced. While Lesnar was seen as the symbol of raw, untamed power, Velasquez represented the embodiment of strategy, precision, and unyielding pressure. The MMA world couldn't help but speculate on what would happen when these two forces collided. Lesnar's title defense against Velasquez had taken on the feel of a pivotal moment, a chance to prove who truly deserved to stand at the top of the heavyweight division. But then, as is often the case in the world of MMA, things weren't quite as simple as they seemed. Velasquez's rise to the top hadn't been without its struggles. Despite his tremendous skill and discipline, there were always questions about his ability to handle the immense pressure that came with being a champion. His career had been marked by injuries, and those around him worried that his style, constantly pressuring opponents with unrelenting aggression, might take a toll on his body. But Velasquez wasn't a man to back away from a challenge. He trained harder, pushed through the pain, and kept his eyes on the ultimate goal. For Lesnar, the stakes were equally high. After years of battling critics, the pressure to prove himself was overwhelming. His critics were quick to point out that his losses, particularly his defeat at the hands of Frank Mir, showed that he had weaknesses. They questioned his ability to handle a fighter like Velasquez, someone who wouldn't let up, who would never give him the time to recover or reset. Lesnar's performance in the lead-up to the fight had left some fans unsure he'd been dominant. Yes, but there were flashes of vulnerability. Could he overcome them in this pivotal moment, or would the relentless pressure of Velasquez break him? But as much as fans speculated and analysts debated, the true drama of this fight lay in what would happen inside the cage. In the first round, both fighters were feeling each other out, with Lesnar using his wrestling base to control the action early on. But as Velasquez's footwork became evident, as he moved fluidly around the cage and landed crisp combinations, it was clear that Lesnar's plan to dominate through power wasn't going to be as easy as he had hoped. And then, the tension took a dramatic turn. Velasquez's ability to endure punishment, his relentless forward movement, began to take a toll on Lesnar. Each time Brock tried to reset, Velasquez was right there, pushing him into uncomfortable positions, landing shots that stung and seemed to wear Lesnar down. The larger fighter, once feared for his explosive power, was being methodically broken down. As Velasquez continued to press forward, Lesnar started to show signs of frustration. The crowd, once cheering for their champion, now fell silent as they watched Brock struggle to keep up with Velasquez's pace. A moment of hesitation, a slight misstep, and Velasquez capitalized, taking the fight to the ground. The sound of fists hitting flesh reverberated throughout the arena. It was clear, Velasquez wasn't just here to win. He was here to prove that his approach to the sport was the future of heavyweights, while Lesnar's power was being neutralized by the relentless pressure. Lesnar, however, wasn't the kind of fighter to quit easily. The deeper they went into the fight, the more it seemed like the former champion might find a way to claw back into the contest. The fight was far from over, and as the rounds ticked by, the battle for the heavyweight crown seemed to be anyone's to claim. But at the same time, there was a lingering question. Could Lesnar summon the same fire that had brought him to the top of the UFC in the first place? Or was he facing an opponent who had unlocked the one thing Lesnar hadn't yet figured out: how to deal with the pressure of a fighter who would never back down? The mystery of what would happen next, of how the fight would unfold, kept the world on the edge of their seats. Would the power of Brock Lesnar turn the tide? Or was Cain Velasquez about to rewrite the history of UFC's heavyweight division forever? Only time would tell. But the tension was only growing more unbearable. The fight raged on, each round slipping further into chaos, yet neither man seemed willing to give in. The crowd held its breath as the momentum continued to shift back and forth. For Lesnar, this was becoming more than just a title defense. It was a test of everything he had ever been. His confidence, once so apparent, had begun to fade. Velasquez, relentless as ever, was in his element, pushing the pace, landing strikes that seemed to erode Lesnar's resolve with every second. But in the fourth round, something unexpected happened. Lesnar, who had been staggered by the constant pressure and speed of Velasquez, suddenly found his second wind. It wasn't just raw power that was re-emerging, but a sharpness, a clarity that had been lacking in the earlier rounds. It was as though a switch had been flipped. In a sudden burst of intensity, Lesnar pressed forward, moving with a sense of urgency that the crowd hadn't seen up until then. His hands were quicker, his takedowns more precise, and for a brief moment, it looked like the beast might be awakening once more. His corner had been shouting instructions, but now Lesnar wasn't just listening to them, he was executing with precision. But Cain Velasquez wasn't one to back down. If anything, his response was even more shocking. Velasquez had already established that his cardio and pressure game could overwhelm Lesnar, but now he began to show something deeper. Despite the assault from Lesnar, Velasquez's confidence didn't falter. He absorbed the blows, then moved forward, countering with a ferocity that made it clear he had no intention of simply surviving this fight. He was in it to win. His eyes burned with determination. He could sense the shift too, but where Lesnar saw an opportunity to regain control, Velasquez saw only another hurdle to overcome. And that's when the true tension hit its peak. Just when Lesnar seemed to be gaining some traction, a pivotal moment would come that left the arena stunned. In one of the most shocking exchanges of the fight, Velasquez connected with a brutal uppercut, catching Lesnar off guard and sending him stumbling backward. The force of the punch was enough to send shockwaves through the crowd, and suddenly, Lesnar's earlier burst of energy seemed like a distant memory. The champ, who had once been the fearsome force in the UFC, was on the ropes. Lesnar's ability to recover was legendary, but this time, there was something different. He was slower, more sluggish than usual. Was it the accumulation of punishment? The relentless pressure? Or had Velasquez simply figured out the one thing that no one had been able to crack? The more the fight dragged on, the more it felt like Lesnar was running out of options, and every move he made was countered with surgical precision by Velasquez. It was during this crucial point that the audience began to realize something. Velasquez wasn't just fighting for the championship. He was fighting for something much deeper. The years of hard work, the countless hours in the gym, the dedication to being the best, it all led to this one moment. Velasquez had been considered the underdog by many, but this wasn't an ordinary fight. This was Velasquez's time to solidify his place in MMA history, and he wasn't going to let anyone, not even a powerhouse like Lesnar, take that from him. As the fight continued, it became increasingly clear that Lesnar was on borrowed time. His defense, once a cornerstone of his dominance, was crumbling. With every takedown attempt, Velasquez's control was flawless. Every time Lesnar tried to reset, Velasquez there, breaking him down mentally and physically. Lesnar, to his credit, never stopped fighting. His pride, his sheer will, was something no one could take away from him. But there was something about Velasquez's style, something about his ability to keep the pressure high without ever seeming to tire, that was breaking Lesnar down in ways no one had expected. Then, just as Lesnar seemed to find a slight opening, the unexpected happened again. The cage door shook, the crowd grew silent, and a brief but noticeable hesitation overtook Lesnar's movements. What was it? Was it the realization that he couldn't break Velasquez's momentum? Or had the relentless pace of the fight simply taken too much of a toll on his body? Either way, this split-second lapse was all Velasquez needed. In an instant, Velasquez closed the distance, clinched with Lesnar, and took him to the ground with a precision that left the crowd gasping. The takedown was smooth, but the ground and pound that followed was a statement that Lesnar could no longer avoid. The once invincible champion, who had ruled the UFC's heavyweight division with a mix of brute strength and wrestling prowess, was now in a position he had rarely found himself in. He was outclassed. Velasquez's elbows rained down, and every strike seemed to echo louder than the last. The referee hovered nearby, sensing that this could be it, but Lesnar wasn't done yet. His heart, his drive, had kept him in the game, but the question lingered, how much more could he take? His body had absorbed punishment in the past, but could he weather this storm? Velasquez, though, wasn't looking for a mere win. He wasn't looking for a quick finish. His eyes locked onto Lesnar, watching his every move, reading the situation like a book. Each blow from Velasquez felt more like a message to Lesnar, to the MMA world, and to everyone watching at home. This fight wasn't just about the title, it was about proving who truly belonged in the octagon. And as the seconds stretched into what felt like hours, the audience was held in a collective state of disbelief. Lesnar's reign was on the verge of ending, but how? And would Velasquez finish it before the round ended? With every passing second, the drama escalated. Could Lesnar mount a miraculous comeback? Or was this the defining moment when Cain Velasquez would prove that relentless pressure could conquer even the strongest force in UFC history? The clock continued ticking, and the fight was nearing its critical moment. The tension in the arena reached a boiling point as the seconds ticked away. Velasquez's ground control was unrelenting, and each punch that landed on Lesnar seemed to drain the last reserves of strength from the former champion. Lesnar, fighting through the overwhelming pressure, managed to scramble once more, trying to shift his position, but the weight of Velasquez's relentless attack bore down on him. The crowd was on the edge of their seats, sensing the inevitable conclusion, but no one could have anticipated just how it would unfold. In the final moments of the round, with Lesnar barely able to move beneath the constant barrage of punches, Velasquez saw his opportunity. With a swift movement, he locked in a devastating ground and pound, landing several crushing blows to Lesnar's head. The referee's eyes darted between the two fighters, knowing that the end was near. One more strike, and it would all be over. Lesnar, battered and exhausted, tried to lift his hands in defense, but his body had betrayed him. He was too slow, too worn out to react to the onslaught. And then, with the arena holding its breath, the referee swooped in, signaling the end of the fight. Cain Velasquez had done it. He had defeated Brock Lesnar in spectacular fashion, becoming the UFC heavyweight champion in the process. The crowd erupted in applause, and as Velasquez stood triumphantly in the octagon, it wasn't just a victory for him. It was a victory for everything he had worked for every sacrifice he had made to reach this moment. Velasquez had silenced the critics, showing the world that his relentless style, his unbreakable spirit, had carried him to the pinnacle of the sport. He had dethroned Lesnar, the man many thought was unstoppable, and proved that sometimes the heart and determination of a fighter could overcome even the most dominant forces. Lesnar, however, didn't retreat quietly. The look on his face told a story of frustration, of defeat, but also of respect. He had fought with everything he had, but in the end, Cain Velasquez had been the better man on that night. His power had been neutralized, his strategy undone by a fighter who was relentless in his pursuit of victory. There would be no excuses, no denying that Velasquez had earned his place at the top of the UFC's heavyweight division. But the story didn't end there. As Velasquez celebrated with his team, the questions began to swirl. What's next for Brock Lesnar? Would he return to reclaim his title, or had Velasquez's win shattered his confidence forever? And what did this mean for the future of the UFC's heavyweight division? Cain Velasquez had proven that he could beat the best, but would he be able to defend his title against the next wave of challengers? His reign had just begun, and the next challenge loomed large. Lesnar, meanwhile, was left to reflect on the fight, on what had gone wrong, and whether he could come back stronger. The fight with Velasquez was a wake-up call, a reminder that even the strongest champions could be dethroned by the right combination of skill, pressure, and determination. It was clear that the heavyweight division had changed, but only time would tell if Lesnar could rise to the occasion once again. As the night wound down and the excitement from the fight slowly ebbed away, one thing was certain: this fight would go down in UFC history as one of the most unforgettable battles in the sport's history. Cain Velasquez had earned his place in the record books, but the war for the UFC heavyweight championship was far from over. The road ahead would be filled with new challenges, new rivalries, and new contenders ready to take their shot at greatness. For now, though, it was Velasquez's moment to savor, and for Brock Lesnar, the future remained uncertain, but he was never a fighter to back down from a challenge. As the crowd slowly filtered out of the arena, the echoes of Velasquez's victory reverberated. His name would forever be associated with one of the greatest upsets in UFC history. And while this chapter of the rivalry had come to a close, the legacy of both fighters was far from written. Would Velasquez defend his title with the same intensity that had earned him the victory? And would Lesnar come back with a vengeance, determined to reclaim what he had lost? These questions would fuel the next wave of the UFC's heavyweight wars, and fans would eagerly await the answers.